book, and we have to emphasize Daniel's very careful. In every situation that you find him in, he gives God the glory. Super, super important. He testifies to the king that this is the Lord. Only the Lord could do this. I couldn't do it. He says it in verse 30. As for me, this secret was not revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes who make known the interpretation to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. So don't give me credit for this. It's the Lord. There's a God in heaven. You don't know him. We know him. You don't know him. He told us what your dream was. We're going to prove to you that he's real. But don't think it's because of something that I did. It was God. It was God because he wants to save us and because he wants to show you. So then he tells them the dream. You were seeing this great image, verse 31. Splendor was excellent. It was standing before you. It was awesome. Its image was one of fine gold, the head gold, its chest and arms were silver, the belly and the thighs were bronze, the legs were iron, and the feet were partly iron and partly clay. Then you watched while a stone was cut out, or without hands was cut, just a stone appears, and it struck the image in its feet of iron and clay, and it broke them into pieces, and then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, the gold were crushed. They became like the chaff from the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away. There was no trace of them found. And that stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Probably Nebuchadnezzar was like, that's the dream. That's it. Yes, that's exactly what I dreamed. Now Daniel says, here's the interpretation. Verse 37, you, O king, are a king of kings. The God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, glory. Wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, the birds of the heaven are, he's given them into your hand. He's made you ruler over them all. You're the head of gold. Nebuchadnezzar was like, that's right. Right? That's an amazing, this is important. I'm the head of gold. Yeah, but watch the next line. But after you, verse 39, there will arise another kingdom inferior to yours. That's kind of humiliating. Your kingdom doesn't go on forever. An inferior kingdom replaces you. I'm going to be replaced by... It's like telling the Super Bowl team, you're going to be beat by an inferior team. Wait, what? We're the champs. No, you're going to be beaten by a team less qualified, with less stars, less of a payroll, worse coaches. They're going to beat you. And then that kingdom is going to be replaced by another one. Then there's the fourth kingdom. He describes that briefly. It's like iron. It's strong. It crushes everything. It's going to crush all the others. And then the feet you saw that were partly clay and iron in verse 41, that kingdom is going to be divided. It will have some strength of the iron, but it will be weak because it's the clay and the iron together. And then there's 10 toes. He sees them, and there's going to be the kingdom that's going to end up with these 10 toes. And then in the days of those kings that symbolized by these 10 toes, God's going to set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. So your kingdom will end. That stone that you saw and all these that disappear, this is the kingdom that's going to go on forever. So that's your message. You're not king forever. You're not the greatest king ever. Yeah, of these, you're the head of gold. But you're not. Beyond that, you're not going to last, and you're going to be replaced. It's important. So Nebuchadnezzar responds to this. He fell on his face, tells Daniel, your God's the only God. No one else could do this. He promotes Daniel. Daniel asked for his friends to be put in positions, and Daniel sat in the gate. And that's kind of a precursor to chapter 3 and chapter 4. You got to think of chapter 2, 3, and 4 as kind of a unit. Maybe not linguistically. I mean, they are all in Aramaic, but thematically. If you look at this, you're like, wow, Nebuchadnezzar is a convert. Not even close. Not even close. Because look at chapter 3. The very first thing you read after he is aware of this, Nebuchadnezzar, chapter 3, verse 1, the king made an image of gold. What about the silver and the brass and the iron and all that? No, my image that I made is all gold. Its height was 60 cubits, or about 90 feet, and its width was 6 cubits, or what is that, almost 10 feet. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So this tall, skinny golden statue goes all the way up. I'm going to make a pile of gold that's going to be about my greatness, and my image is all gold. But I thought you had a dream. Like, never mind what God said. I thought God was a revealer of secrets. Like he's blowing the whistle on God and throwing a flag. Personal foul, unnecessary bossiness. God's not going to tell me what to do. personal foul, roughing the king. You're not going to tell me that. I'm going to tell you how it's going to be. Be careful. This is a great warning. This passage is a great warning, and we'll see someone get held accountable to this lesson, the lesson from this chapter and the next chapter. We want to learn from these lessons so we don't make the same mistake. God makes something clear. You're like, all right, Lord, we'll do it your way, not my way. So he makes this decision to make this thing against what God's picture that God gave him. He's making, I'm the head of gold. I'm all of it gold. It's all me. And then he gets all of the rulers, gathers everybody together for this gigantic party and time to worship this image. There's a whole list of all these different administrative, bureaucratic kind of positions, all the government people, all the leaders, business, everybody comes. The herald tells them, listen, and when you hear this music, everybody worships. So they get this gigantic area. Everybody's out there, this whole symphony orchestra. The music plays. Whoever doesn't fall down, I mean, it's a threat. Apparently, the thing's not so inspirational. You wouldn't just see it and automatically fall down. I think if you saw God, you automatically fall down. Even people, when they see an angel, they automatically fall down. They don't have to command it. People just go, boom, right? They just pass out. God, Isaiah falls down. Abraham, whoever, John in the book of Revelation falls down. When it's a false God, someone's got to force you to fall down, right? They got to threaten your life, or you like, that's not a God. It's a golden, super skinny, freaky thing. Like, why would I bow down before that? You're going to get killed if you don't do this. So this is a problem for Daniel's friends. Daniel's nowhere to be found in this chapter. I'll let you guess where he is. Who knows where he is? He's probably on the king's business somewhere else, is my guess. So he's not there, but the other leaders, jealous of Daniel's friends, they come, verse 8, and they accuse these young men, these Jews. They say, these fellas, verse 12, they don't bow down. So Nebuchadnezzar brings them in. And verse 14, he says, is it true that you're not worshiping my image? And I'm going to give you another chance, verse 15. You hear this music, you're going to bow down, right? Like, let's get this clear. Let's do a redo, a do-over. And he says this at the end of verse 15. Who is the God who can deliver you from my hands? He asks them a question. Which God can deliver you from my hands? I've captured you. If your God could deliver you, he would have delivered you when I conquered your city. I've got articles from his temple in my treasure house. I conquered him. I have your king here as a captive. I captured you. I turned you into eunuchs. I made you my slaves. You speak my language. I gave you new names. If your God was going to deliver you, why didn't he do it already? Some of the greatest verses in the whole Bible, verses 16 to 18. Their answer. Verse 16, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. You asked us a question. It's a rhetorical question for us. Who's the God that's able to deliver out of our hands? Like, we don't even need to answer. You're going to find out in a second, bro. It's the same thing when David fights Goliath. When David shows up and Goliath comes out, Goliath is mocking the army, and Goliath makes this terrible mistake of mocking the God of Israel. He didn't just pick a fight with King Saul. He's picking a fight with God. And that's the thing. Part of the thing when you're praying for our government leaders or some of the laws that are coming out or some of the really anti-biblical reality, some of the policies that are being brought out through a school district or through local governments or through the state government or whatever. Listen, they could say, well, these Christians are this, and they pick a fight with us. Like, look, we're lambs, man. We're sheep. Like, whatever. We'll submit to the government. But once the government says, who's the God that can deliver you out of our hands? Like, oh, no. You didn't just say that, did you? So they say, we don't need to answer you. What you just said, I don't need to answer that. It's an interesting answer, considering they have no recourse. They have no lawyer. This guy can say and do whatever he wants. They say, verse 17, and this is wonderful wisdom, if that's the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. We have no worries that God could deliver us from your furnace. He's going to deliver us from your hands. And there's another alternative. If not, no matter what, he will deliver us. He will deliver us from your fire, or he won't. We'll go into the fire, and he'll deliver us through the fire. But they say, if not, verse 18, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the golden image that you've set up. It's an amazing, amazing answer and true manliness. There's nothing wrong with masculinity when it's surrendered to God. There's the phrase today of toxic masculinity, which I think any person outside the government of God, whether male or female, if you're going to try to find your identity, what it is to be feminine outside of the will of God, that's toxic. That's deadly. It's destructive. It's horrible. Some perverted version of masculinity or perverted version of femininity. It's like, or whatever you think that it is to be a woman, if you go outside the government of God, it's toxic. But under the government of God, what does God say a woman is? What does God say a man is? These young men look at the king and they have tremendous wisdom. We're not going to do what you say. God can deliver us. We're not worried about it. That's pretty bold. Nebuchadnezzar freaks out, verse 19. He has a conniption fit, full of fury. The expression on his face changed. So he just went to like that. Just savage, like his neck veins popping. He's like, "Arr!" He tells the guys, heat that furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. So a furnace that you're planning on cremating somebody is already pretty hot. Make that thing go as hot as you can make it. We're going to just smoke these guys and show them. So they take their Navy SEALs, verse 20, commanded certain mighty men of valor. So this is the elite troops that are right there with the king, his personal guard. Grab these guys, they tie them up with all their clothes on, it says, and they throw them in the furnace. But the problem, verse 22, is he made it so hot that the guys that were throwing them in got killed. It was raging. And as they got close to the fire where they could throw them in, the heat was so much that they succumbed to the heat. And thou they're in the fire. Verse 23, the 3 men fell bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Something about the book of Daniel, we're going to see it again later in chapter 6, that God doesn't deliver them by keeping them out of the trial. God delivers them by going into the trial with them, and as they're in the trial and they're going through the trial, he sustains them through the difficulty. So when you're praying, I'm not saying don't pray not to go into trials. That's a good prayer. I don't want any of you guys to go through trials, so please pray that because I don't want you to be in trouble. But generally, trials, they do good. They do good work in our life. They produce patience, and let patience have its perfect work, that you would be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. So you're going to go through trials. So yes, pray that you don't go through them, but really the reality is, Lord, be with me. Be with me no matter what I'm going through. And if you find yourself in a series of things that are happening, just ask the Lord, show me, Lord, show me yourself in the midst of this. Let these circumstances bring me closer to you and not the other way around where these circumstances are pushing me away. So they're there, and Nebuchadnezzar's watching, and now he's more than freaked out. Verse 24, he's shocked because he gets up, he looks. He's watching this to watch these guys burn. He wants to hear them scream. He's an evil person. And he says, didn't we throw 3 men into the fire? They said, yes. And he said, verse 25, but look, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they're not hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. 4 people in the fire. I'm counting them. 1, 2, 3, 4. These dudes are walking around in the furnace. Apparently it's big enough for people to cruise around inside of the furnace. Big Babylonian show-off furnace. And he's going to make a big play out of it. Anybody who goes against him, he's going to throw him in the fire. So he's got a big viewing area or whatever. And all of a sudden, these guys go in. There's dead corpses where the guys try to get him in the fire. They're dead, succumbing to the fire. And there's 4 people walking around in the fire. What in the world? So now he has a problem. He then says, calls them out into the fire. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. Who's the God that can deliver me out of your hands? We don't really care what you say, king. Throws them in the fire, furious. Now it's, servants of the Most High God, please come out of the fire that you're walking around in that killed my guys. So they come out, and they're fine. There's nothing wrong with them. They're all shocked. There's no power. The fire had no power of them. It says the hair was not singed on their head. Their garments weren't affected, and they didn't even smell like smoke. You can't have a fire at the beach and not smell like smoke. You can't make a little fire in your backyard with wood and not smell like smoke. You can't take 3 little mini logs and put them in your little fake fireplace in your prefab house here in Elk Grove and not go, is the flume open? You get barely a couple logs and you're going to smell like smoke. These guys are in a fiery furnace. They come out, do check it. All my hairs, my eyebrows, I'm still good. Nothing, no sign at all. So Nebuchadnezzar says, look at verse 28, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, sent his angel to deliver them. I make a decree that no one should serve or worship any god except their God. And I make a decree that if anybody speaks against this God, they'll be chopped up and they'll burn their houses. And there's no other God like this God. So at the end of chapter 2, you're like, wow, I think he got saved. And then chapter 3 says, no, I don't think he did. Then at the end of chapter 3, you go, wow, I think he got saved. Well, no, I don't think he did. That leads us to chapter 4, which is written by Nebuchadnezzar. I don't know if you knew this about the Bible. There's a chapter in Aramaic written by a pagan king. And it's in the Bible, and it's an amazing chapter. It's a letter that he wrote. Nebuchadnezzar the king, chapter 4. To all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I thought it good to declare the signs and the wonders that the Most High God has worked for me. How great are his signs, how mighty are his wonders. You mean like the time when he interpreted your dream? No, that didn't really get to me. You mean the time when you threw the guys in the fire and they were survived? No, not that one. Well, which one are you talking about? This one. Something else happened to him. How great are his signs, how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. His dominion is from generation to generation. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was resting in my house, flourishing in my palace. Sometimes I feel like that, by the way, on my day off. I'm resting in my house, flourishing in my palace. And I try to remember this letter, and I think, don't get too flourishy. Stay humble. But I love that line. I was resting in my house, I was flourishing in my palace. And I had this dream, verse 5, which made me afraid. The thoughts on my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. I issued a decree to bring all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. Sounds familiar, right? Listen to how it changes. Then the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, soothsayers, they all came in. I told them the dream, but they didn't make known to me its interpretation. The first time, I didn't know the dream. I said, you got to tell me the dream. I don't trust any of you guys. This time, the dream bugs him. He remembers it. He tells them the dream. Now, if you read through this, if you haven't read through it, we're going to look at it in a second. This dream's pretty straightforward. You don't have to be a dream scientist to figure this one out. So, at last, Daniel comes, verse 8, who we called, it's interesting, at last Daniel, his name is Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God. In him is the spirit of the holy God. But we call him Daniel. I named him Belteshazzar, but we don't really use that name. It's interesting to me that in this letter, he calls him Daniel. And so he says, Belteshazzar, at that point, chief of the magicians, because I know that the Spirit of God is in you, no secret troubles you, so can you tell me my dream? This is my dream. And so tell me if you can figure this one out before Daniel interprets it. I was looking, behold, there was a tree in the midst of the earth. Its height was great. The tree grew, became very strong. Its height reached to the heavens. It could be seen to the ends of the earth. Leaves were lovely. Fruit was abundant. In it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it. The birds of the heavens dwelt under its branches. All the flesh, everyone fed from it. And then I saw in the visions of my head while I was on my bed, there was a watcher, a holy one, came down from heaven, and he cried out and he said, chop down the tree. Cut off its branches, strip off its leaves, scatter its fruit, let the beasts get out from under it, and the birds from its branches. Nevertheless, leave the stump and the roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze in the tender grass of the field. Let it be wet with the dew of heaven. Let him graze. Now it goes to him. Let him graze with the beasts on the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from that of a man. Let him be given the heart of a beast, and let 7 times pass over him. This decision's by the decree of the watchers, the sentence by the word of the holy ones, in order that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, and he gives it to whomever he will, and he sets over it the lowest of men. That last part doesn't need any interpretation. He sets over the kingdoms the lowest of men. Who's over the kingdom? Nebuchadnezzar. What did God just call him? The basest man. Okay. So what's the interpretation? This amazing tree gets chopped down. And God says, I've been watching and I'm judging this person that has ruled over everything. And all the other Chaldeans are like, I don't know what that dream means at all. What are they doing? They're politicians. They're getting asked a question and they're not answering it. You better believe we're not answering it. You're going to get killed. So, hey, can you tell me the dream? He says in verse 18. So Daniel says, the tree that first he says in verse 19, hey, king, may the dream be about those who hate you and be for your enemies. And he tells them, listen, that tree, that's you. And you've grown up, you're great, your dominion goes everywhere. Verse 22 says, you saw the watcher come down and chop you down. Here's the interpretation, verse 24. This is the decree of the Most High, which has now come upon my Lord the King. They're going to drive you from men. Your dwelling will be with the beasts, what the dream actually said. They'll make you eat grass like oxen. Your heart's going to change. You're going to be wet with the dew of heaven for 7 times. We don't know exactly how long. It could be 7 years, 7 seasons, 7 time periods until you know. So this is disciplinary. You're going to learn something through this experience. Till you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, he gives it to whomever he chooses. And inasmuch as they gave the command to leave the stump, your kingdom will be there until you come to know that heaven rules. Therefore, here's my advice, verse 27. O king, let my advice be acceptable to you. Break off your sins by being righteous, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. Perhaps there might be a lengthening of your prosperity. Thank you, Daniel. He doesn't kill him. The other fellows are probably listening going, don't say it. It's not hard. You can't read giant tree gets chopped down. The guy's heart changes. He becomes a beast and eats grass. it's not hard to interpret this. So Nebuchadnezzar says, there I was 12 months later, verse 29, I'm walking around in my royal palace. And verse 30, is not this great Babylon that I built for a royal dwelling by my mighty power and for the honor of my majesty? And that's the last time he gets to say something like that. So when God's going to work in our life, many times we get warned and we get warned and we get warned, and then it seems like it's a sudden judgment or a sudden awakening, but never think that it's sudden. You say, wow, that sure happened. Well, probably knowing the Lord, even with Nebuchadnezzar. Well, way back, these refugees came and you saw they were the worshipers of God. They were 10 times better than your guys. Then you had this dream. Only this guy could know it. Then you threw these guys in the fiery furnace when you were rejecting the word of God, and God delivered them. And now you're still saying this? Are you out of your mind? Is it a sudden judgment? Because he loses it. It says, verse 31, while the word was still in the king's mouth, a voice came from heaven. King Nebuchadnezzar, it's been spoken, the kingdom's departed from you. And now he turns into a beast. He's driven, verse 33. He lives outside. He eats grass. If they try to talk to him, he just maybe moos at them. Old MacDonald had a farm. And on his farm was Nebuchadnezzar, E-I-E-I-O. And Nebuchadnezzar said, I don't know, what is he? He completely goes insane. And verse 34, at the end of the time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up my eyes. My understanding returned to me. I blessed the Most High. I praised and honored him who lives forever and ever. His dominion's an everlasting dominion. His kingdom is from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are as nothing. He does according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. No one can restrain his hand or say to him, what have you done? At the same time, my reason came back to me, for the glory of my kingdom and my honor and my splendor returned to me. My counselors and my nobles resorted to me. I was restored to my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added to me. God didn't depose him. He let him come back to be the king. God had given him the kingdom. He just took it away to teach him something. The end of the letter. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all of whose works are truth and his ways are justice, and those who walk in pride he's able to put down. That's a beautiful letter. Chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. At the end of chapter 4, you're like, he didn't threaten anybody to burn their house down if they don't worship God. He's not, he's like a different guy. He's converted. 7 seasons out of his mind, and then God brings it back to him, and he realizes you know what? I've been a Nebuchadnezzar. It's time for me to repent. So that's Nebuchadnezzar's story. It's important that we put that because we're going to jump way into the future. Belshazzar, his grandson, is the first person mentioned in chapter 5, verse 1. We're jumping. There's another king who is between him and Belshazzar, who's a co-regent with Belshazzar for some period of time. And Belshazzar is the king when the Persians and the Medes together have come against Babylon. He's not a very good leader. He's just the person that was born in opulence and has everything given to him. He's a terrible character. They're losing decisive battles to the Medes and the Persians till they've lost every strategic battle till the Persians are surrounding Babylon, or the army of the Medes surrounding Babylon. And Belshazzar then, we're jumping way forward. A lot of time passes. We don't know anything about Daniel's life during that time. So Nebuchadnezzar learns this now, this chapter 5. Belshazzar the king makes a great feast for 1,000 of his lords, and they're drinking wine in the presence of the 1,000. This is significant because you read through the chapter, you know that he gets a message from God, and we're told in this chapter that night, their city falls to the Medes and the Persians. So what is the dude doing having a party on the night that he dies? What is he doing? He has no care in the world. There's no way they're going to conquer Babylon. Babylon has a wall that, according to the historians, the ones that are clearly exaggerating say the walls are 300 feet high. To other historians who say the walls are 100 feet high. So somewhere between 100 and 300 feet high, the walls. The walls are big enough that the historians say they would have chariot races on the wall, 3 chariots wide around the city. The Euphrates River runs through the city. The city's so big that they actually have space within the walls of the city where they can grow enough crops to feed everybody. They've got the river, they've got the crops. You could surround them and live outside surrounding them, laying siege to them for 100 years, and they're just going to laugh at you from the wall. You're never going to breach the walls. They have brass gates blocking the river. They have walls built along the river where the river goes through. They have bridges that go across, and the bridges have brass gates. There's no army that's going to be able to take them. The secular historians tell us that they fell in one night, and it wasn't through a great military battle. The Medes and Persians surrounded them. They diverted the river around the city. A small team went in on the dry riverbed, and when they came to these bridges with the brass gates, they were unlocked. The guards had been partying. Everyone was drunk. They were passed out. They came in without any fighting. They found the palace, and they slaughtered all the leaders. They all happened to be in one place. What does the Bible say happens? Where's Daniel's not at the thing. He's invited there as an old man. He's not part of this group. 1,000 of the leaders are all together getting drunk, and they're praising their gods while they're surrounded by their enemies the night they're going to fall. Exactly like Isaiah 45 tells us the details about how that would happen. The Babylonian historians give us the secular version of it that totally matches. And so here's this story. They're drinking, they're partying, and then they say, hey, bring those, verse 3, bring those gold vessels that we took from the temple of the house of God in Jerusalem, and we'll drink out of those. And they drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver. And they're worshiping bronze and iron and wood and stone. And while they're doing that, a hand appears, verse 5, and writes opposite their lampstand in the plaster of the wall. So this is the phrase that we have in our vernacular, the handwriting's on the wall. And it implies that, well, the handwriting's on the wall. There it is, really clear what's about to happen to you. This hand appears and writes it on the wall. Verse 6, his reaction, he thinks he's totally protected, nothing can happen to him. His thoughts are troubled, his hand writes, the joints of his hips were loose and his knees were knocking against each other. Now, I haven't been able to verify this, but I keep repeating it, but I can't prove it, or at least I haven't been able to find. My professor when I was in Bible college was a Hebrew expert. He said that this is an idiom. The joints of his hips were loose means that he went in his pants, like he peed himself, or the other one. Number 1 or number 2, whichever one you want. Like his joints were loosened, and his knees were shaking. He's lost it. Cartoon guy. And they can't read the walls, and he promises all kinds of money. You'll be the third ruler in the kingdom. Nobody can read it. And then the queen mother, verse 10, she's older. She says, listen, there's a man, verse 11, there's a man in your kingdom in whom there's the spirit of the holy God. In the days of your father, and in Hebrew there's just one word for father. So grandfather is father, great-grandfather is father, great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather is called father. There's no grandfather word. So this is his grandfather. In the days of your father, light and understanding, wisdom was found in him. King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians. There's an excellent spirit in him. You should ask him. So Daniel comes in. He says, are you Daniel? I've heard of you. I've heard that you can do this. I've heard you can give interpretations. Look at what Daniel says. He said, I'm going to give you all this money. I'm going to make you the third ruler in the kingdom. And Daniel's looking at the writing on the wall. I'm going to make you third ruler in my amazing kingdom and give you my wealth. If that's the message from the Lord, I'm not really that interested, dude. If we only knew everything from God's perspective when someone's offering you something, don't you pray for insight and vision from the Lord, that when someone says, we can give you this much money if you'll do this, that you could see through it and say, you know what? I can read the writing on the wall. You can just keep your money. No, I'm not going to defile myself with the king's meat. I purposed in my heart not to defile myself. So he said, you keep your money. I'm not interested in this. Let your gifts be for yourself. He says, I'll tell you. Verse 18, he gives them a history lesson. Nebuchadnezzar, your father, had majesty, glory, and honor. And because of the majesty that God gave him, all the peoples trembled before him. They feared. Whoever he wished, he executed. Whoever he wished, he kept alive. Whomever he wished, he put up. Whomever he wished, he put down. But, verse 20, when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. And he was driven from the sons of men. His heart was made like a beast, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. They fed him with grass like oxen. His body was wet with the dew of heaven, until he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of men and appoints over it whomever he chooses. That's a summary of the chapter we just read. Why is he repeating this? Look at verse 22. But you, his son, Belshazzar, you've not humbled your heart, notice, although you knew all this. This is really important. This is not a lesson that God was teaching Belshazzar. This was a lesson that God was teaching Nebuchadnezzar, his grandfather. But he saw it. He heard about it. And Daniel says, God's going to hold you accountable for the lesson that you watch somebody else learn. Is that heavy? It makes me think we ought to pay very careful attention. You can look and see what God's doing in someone else's life. Perhaps the Lord might be also wanting you to learn through that experience. God is holding him accountable for what happened in his grandfather's life. So he said, you should have known. Instead, you lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You brought these articles in here, and you have mocked God, and you, the God who holds your breath in his hand, the end of verse 23, who holds your breath in his hand and owns all your ways, you've not glorified. It's a big issue in the chapter. Daniel is a tremendous example of someone who's giving God the glory. Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, they're the exact opposite negative example of the same thing. Do you give God the glory? You've taken the glory. You're not honoring God. So here's the message. Many, many tekel upharsin. Many means God's numbered your kingdom and finished it. That's repeated. Tekel, you've been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom's been divided and it's given to the Medes and the Persians. So your days are done. So Daniel gets his reward. Verse 29, he's made third ruler of the kingdom for 6 hours, or whatever it is in verse 29. Verse 30 tells us that very night, Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, was slain. That's an interesting chapter. We don't know the history, right? That's not in the text. We just know they're having a party with 1,000 people. They're busting it like no one can stop them. Like they're partying like it's 1999. We're going to do whatever we want. A hand appears and says, you're dead. Daniel tells them, this is over for you. And then it just says he got killed that night. The secular historians say that it wasn't a major battle. In fact, the secular historians say it was a couple months until everyone in the whole city of Babylon realized that they'd been conquered. It took a while for the news to get out because they went in and killed the leaders, and they just took over the palace. And then pretty soon, wait, what happened? I went to go talk. Those guys aren't even there. Like, yeah, they're all dead. Wait, what? We got conquered 2 weeks ago. Wait. And they reigned, the Persians, they didn't destroy Babylon. They kept it. They made it their capital for a while. So, or they made it part of their, reign, where they reigned. So Darius the Mede received the kingdom, and he was about 62. So now that gets us to the last chapter we're going to cover. Darius then, he's the new leader, so Daniel survives this transfer. He's not part of this group. He's a very old man now. He's probably into his 80s. And God protects him. So he goes from Nebuchadnezzar to Nebuchadnezzar's son to Belshazzar. The Babylonians fall. The head of gold goes into the shoulders chest of silver. And now the inferior kingdom is there, and Daniel isn't killed. He's kept, and he's distinguished, verse 3. The king puts him over everybody. But verse 4, this creates problems because all the other government leaders, they want to wipe him out, and so they're looking for a charge against him. Can you imagine government leaders who are trying to find charges against other government leaders so they can depose them? There's nothing new under the sun, right? Nothing new at all. Doesn't matter which party, by the way, in our country, who's ever in charge, it's not good. How about we just debate policy in a sensible way and come up with good solutions to the difficult problems that we face? No, I think we should assassinate each other's character and just waste our time fighting. We need to really pray for our leaders, or pray that hands appear and write in the wall. Many tekel upharsin. So they can't find a charge against him. Daniel's got so much integrity, and so they say the only thing about this guy is he follows the law of his God. So they come up with a scheme. They come to Darius. They say, hey, they appeal to his pride. You know what? We should have a 30-day kind of a thing where nobody prays to anybody except you. And here's the vanity of this leader. That's a great law. You mean nobody can ask? Now think about this. You that are moms, no one in your family, none of your children, your husband, no one can ask anybody anything except you. Wait, no, it's my normal life, my mom would say. You imagine you're the ruler of a kingdom and your advisors come, we have a great idea, Pastor Rich. We think nobody in the church can answer anyone's questions. You have to answer every question. No, that's not a good law. Like who would think this is a good idea? If you have this view of yourself, stupid ideas become great ideas. This is the stupidest thing in the world. But if I want to be the center of attention and I want to elevate myself, and they say, you're the only one we can ask. You're the only one. Yeah, no one can pray except to me. Like I'm a god. That's a great idea. Let's make it. And the Medes and Persians they're inferior to the Nebuchadnezzar. If he said it happened. These guys, they're kings. They seem to be under the rule of law. There's a certain law. There's a loophole in a law that there's a certain decree that if it's made and signed a certain way, even the king can't undo it. Which, by the way, is the rule of law, right? The kings need to be under the rule of law, which is not a bad thing. So he makes this decree. And Daniel knew it, verse 10 says. So he went home. Look at verse 10. In his upper room, with his windows open towards Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since the early days. Daniel's a man of prayer. He's been praying. This is what Solomon prayed. If they go into captivity and they turn and pray, then God, will you hear them? And God said, yes, I will. And Daniel's been doing it the whole time, 3 times a day. The window's open. Well, that's going to be the law. That's going to be the law. They're going to have to kill me. He does it. So they quickly catch him. Oh, look at, didn't you say this? The king realizes, I'm not going to say it, what I was thinking. He's thinking it. He heard it. He was greatly displeased. He's mad at himself, verse 14 says. He tries to get whatever slick lawyers. He gets Dershowitz and whoever else he can get. Trying to figure out, how do we get out of this, He labors until the sun goes down because he's got to go into the lion's den. And the guys say, listen, there's nothing we can do. And he's like, man, my bureaucrats got me. He's so mad. So we're going to put him in the lion's den. And he says, in verse 16, it's interesting. Daniel's had an impact on Nebuchadnezzar, now on Darius. Look what Darius says in verse 16. Your God whom you serve continually, he will deliver you, as they close the door on him. This king is really upset. He loves Daniel. He knows this is a bad deal. And please, your God will deliver you. So they close him off in there. And the king went to his palace, verse 18. He spends the night fasting and praying, can't fall asleep, gets up as soon as it's morning, runs to the place, to the den of lions. And then verse 20, when he got to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God. I don't know. I'd love to see this in how this really happened. This guy's the king of the world, by the way. Daniel, the king of the world can't help him. The guy with all the power can't do anything. Has your God whom you serve been able to deliver you from the lions? Daniel said, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel to shut the lions' mouths so that they haven't hurt me. I was found innocent before the king, and before you, O king, I've done no wrong. Of course, the king was glad. They brought him out. Daniel had nothing wrong with him. And then verse 24, the vengeance of the king. He takes all those guys who accused Daniel, throws them, their children, their wives, their whole families into the lion's den, and they're all eaten before they even reach the bottom of the den. So the lions had to sit there all night and look at Daniel and the angel's blocking them, and they're waiting, and then finally these guys go in. It's so sad. I'm done. Thank you. Thanks for that reminder. That's Gina. Thanks, Gina. So King Darius makes a decree. I decree God's the only God. And you say, well, is this one accurate? He delivers. He gives a decree from verse 25 to 27. Well, that depends. In chapter 2, was Nebuchadnezzar converted? In chapter 3, was Nebuchadnezzar converted? When chapter 4, was he? I'm assuming by chapter 4 he was. I want to believe the best about Darius. I'm kind of confident that when we get to heaven, we're going to see Darius the Mede. Is the influence of Daniel and the work of God in a refugee who has no power, who is a foreigner to these guys, his character, his heart, he purposed in his heart. His identity wasn't going to be determined by the government or by somebody else. His identity was going to be determined by his relationship with God. And somebody who makes that determination is going to change the world. Without money, without power, without whatever. God will give him favor. God will open doors. God will put him where he wants to put him. And I think Nebuchadnezzar will also see him in heaven as probably in many ways as evil as he was, as vindictive or violent or abusive or just a bad person, you'd say. But he humbles himself. He humbles himself. He acknowledges God. It seems like under the old covenant is an impact with a person who's a believer. So I've got a lot of hope for those guys. It's interesting. The message of the book of Daniel is incredible hopefulness for those of us living in very dark times when the evil seems to be overwhelming. This is such an encouraging book. The passage that we looked at this morning, the things that were written before were written for our learning, that through the patience and comfort of the scriptures we might have hope. You look at your world and you become hopeless, you need to just keep rereading Daniel. You look at the things going on in the darkness. I mean, tonight's the Oscars tonight, right? This is what the world's all about. Like, that's not what the world's all about. I was just reading an article about the Grammys, and they were saying they're not sure that they could have the Grammys on network television because how defiling the MTV Awards were, with the musicians doing so many things that were over the edge, graphically sexual, that they thought if they think they're going to do this, they can't do it on network TV. Like, here's an award show that can't be shown on network TV because of its graphic evil. It's just stuff you think, like, I can't believe that somebody would do that. But, you just go back, like, well, Ozzy Osbourne's biting the head off a dove, or, whatever. David Bowie's doing his thing, or this person's doing their thing, or the Doors are doing their thing, or Elvis is swinging his hips, or it's not anything new. It's just evil. It's evil, darkness in the world. Don't believe for a minute that one person making a decision in their heart is not the most important thing happening in a generation. Don't let the devil confuse you. This is the book of Daniel. It's not the book of Nebuchadnezzar. It's not the book of Darius. It's the book of Daniel. Daniel and his friends. It's their story. It's the story of God. That's our story, right? That's our identity. No one changes our name. God, the only one who can determine our identity. So, Father, do a work in us. We thank you for getting us through hard times, and certainly the book of Daniel gives great hope that you'll be with us in trials. So Help us, Lord. Help us to turn to you. Help us to determine in our hearts to surrender to you, to look to you. Bless your word to all of our hearts, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.